Okay, if we can. Okay, if we can sit down so we can get started here, so we can get done. Let everybody get a chance to visit. Welcome to March 25th, Energy, Utilities, and Telecommunications. First order of business is approval of minutes. Representative Gartner. Ready to motion? Second. Second by Representative Schreiber. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, same side. Thank you. All right, we're moving along real quick here. First up, we have presentations on renewable energy in Kansas. Kimberly Swati of Genter. I never can say that right. How am I supposed to say that?
Mr. Chairman, I have the two of the craziest last names. So Genscher is my maiden name, and it rhymes with venture. Remember that department store? But it's spelled differently, or like denture, but also spelled differently. And then, of course, Swati, which the V sounds like a W. It's like a fly swatter. So anyway. I mean,
I was just talking about Genter. I didn't want to pronounce that wrong, but okay.
Well, just think denture, but then spell it differently.
Well, welcome to committee, and please identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to be here before you. Yes, I have two crazy Czech last names, but I went to Shawnee Mission Schools, and the former school superintendent, he called my name once out, and he said Kimberly Gincourt, and I thought that was the prettiest way of hearing my last names, but it's not. It's very Genscher. So anyway, my name is Kimberly Genscher Swati, and I do represent the Kansas Advanced Power Alliance. And usually we give this presentation at the beginning of the legislative session, and I know we've got some really important topics to go through after me, so I'm just going to kind of breeze through this. But we do represent about 40 member companies, ranging from the investors in renewable energy to the owners, operators, developers. So we used to have what was called the super majors in the oil and gas industry, your ExxonMobil, your Chevron, BP certainly. And it's interesting because we now have the new super majors. So NextEra Energy Resources LLC spent all fall juggling back and forth between being the largest company market cap wise between them and ExxonMobil. And then the other largest super majors are all also members of my organization. So like Oristad, BP, NextEra Energy Resources LLC, and NL. And so those are kind of considered the new super majors in the energy sphere. But of course, also Chevron and several of the other energy companies are also members of ours. So Josh and I, who he's online, I think, watching, and we both represent the Kansas Power Alliance. And so whether it's wind energy or whether or not it's solar or green hydrogen or battery storage, so anything in the new advanced energy technology space is what we work on. And as you've heard, Kansas supplies about 43% of our state's power, and we anticipate that number to be higher. Our new data comes out in a couple of weeks as far as the 2020 information. So we do anticipate that number going higher. And I will say for a moment here that there's been a lot of conversation about our energy mix. And I do think we always stress that it is important to have a balanced generation portfolio. So you won't find anyone from our organization saying, this is absolutely the only way to go and that we have to increase these numbers, to 100% or whatnot. But please know that along with the increase in use of renewables comes with a significant increase in economic and investment in the state of Kansas, along with your gaining access to the lowest cost form of generation. So we still do absolutely believe in a balanced generation portfolio. The first operating wind farm came online literally 20 years ago. So when we stand before you and provide information and testimony, it's based off of 20 years worth of data and experience. And so the industry has grown a lot in the state and matured a great deal. And we've learned a lot on how to really cite great projects, work even better with communities and with landowners and with the state. So, and with that, we've brought about $14 billion in private investment. And actually, we just released some updated economic data, and we've actually seen between direct jobs, whether it's O&M jobs or engineering, finance, folks working at Siemens and the supply chain manufacturing sector, those would be direct jobs. And then the indirect jobs, so we see about 20,000 direct and indirect jobs in our state. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, when so much of the state was shut down and when there was so much economic peril, both within our state and then beyond, one of the things that we were so proud of was that we actually had between 7 and 8 wind projects that were either being repowered or they were under construction. And that was all happening, of course, with safe protocols and so on and so forth. But we were able to help restaurants in these small communities that otherwise probably would have closed. They were able to pivot, and they provided on-site catering. We kept hotels literally in all different portions of the state full during that time. I always talk about the Napa Auto Parts dealer who he was supplying oil lubricant to one of the wind farms. And so not only did he not have to worry about closing, he didn't have to worry about laying off any employees. He had his biggest year ever. And so those are the indirect benefits, that and, the individuals that are spraying down the roads on a regular basis. I mean, those are just jobs and investment that people don't always think about, but they're equally as important. We do also employ veterans at one of the highest rates across all industries, so 72% rate higher, or 72% rate higher than the national average of employment of veterans. And the wind turbine technician position is the second fastest growing job in the United States and is forecasted to be so for the next 10 years roughly, second only to the solar installer. And then, of course, another thing that we always talk about is that wind farms have been a fantastic source of diversification for income, not only on energy supply, but income for our farmers and ranchers across the state and for our communities. But as the ag economy has really suffered over the course of the last several years, farmers and ranchers would file Chapter 12 rather than Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And we have yet to find a Kansas farmer or rancher that has actually filed Chapter 12 that has turbines on their ground. And it's because of that income diversification. So again, going back to those indirect benefits, the banks really like that because they know that the farmer or rancher has a good secondary source of dedicated revenue for a multitude of years. The implement dealer in town that may not be selling any equipment for months at a time might be selling some pieces of equipment to keep the shop afloat to those individuals that have turbines. And all of that, of course, helps keep the economy in a lot of these smaller communities going. We have in operation right now about 7,200 megawatts of installed capacity. We're in the top 5 in the United States for installed capacity, and we have just shy of 800 megawatts under construction. And this is on the wind side. Solar side, we have a proposed 500 megawatt wind farm combined with a 500 megawatt on-site battery storage project on the eastern side of the state. We have about 3,600 turbines in operation, and more than 2 million homes are powered in the state by Kansas wind. We also save, and I think that this can't be discounted, about 4.7 billion gallons of water every year is saved by the use of renewable by Kansas wind. One of the things that we are disappointed that we've not been able to do is to have you out on site, and we absolutely look forward to doing that, both to an operating wind farm and then also to a project that's under construction, as well to Siemens, the nacelle manufacturing facility. So when protocols start to lessen and whatnot, we look forward to hosting you there. We've got a couple pictures in the packet that I've provided of Josh at a turbine base with a couple of folks. And we also take county commissioners and local city officials and other kind of key community stakeholders out and take them for tours and provide them with information so they have that. We also have 2 handbooks. So one, we've talked about before, the Wind Energy Siting Handbook that was created by the Kansas Energy Council in 2005. But then also we have put together, Josh and I did this frequently asked questions about renewable energy investment in Kansas. And it's just everything from the types of batteries used in the nacelles to how you handle rock trenchers, whether or not, what does that lay down yard on a wind farm look like? What responsibility does the company have for maintenance of county roads? So all sorts of questions are answered in this document, in this handbook that we've given out and continue to give out to policymakers all around the state. So that is another thing. We can talk a little bit about a company called Invenergy and Grain Belt Express, but I won't spend too much time on that. That's just a high voltage electric transmission line that moves power from the Spearville area of the state and then moves it across north central Kansas and in through Missouri and then up to load centers. So it has a huge economic opportunity for our state, about $8 billion of direct economic investment and the creation of thousands and thousands of jobs, both during the construction phase of the project and then during the construction phase of the wind farms down in the southwestern portion of the area. The other key element about that Grain Belt Express project is that along the towers, they're going to put up broadband as well. So it'll be another way for those rural communities along the route of the Grain Belt Express to gain access to high-speed internet. So that's a little bit about GBX. So one of the questions we get asked a lot is who's purchasing Kansas Wind? And of course, we are part of Southwest Power Pool, and Southwest Power Pool does, they handle our day-ahead market, and we work well. I mean, we work every single day with them on forecasting, so we can say exactly how much wind is going to be produced, the next day ahead, and the whole system can be adjusted accordingly. So that's a little bit about, we operate in that SPP market. We are participants in there. And so who's purchasing Kansas Wind? So certainly the utilities are, because it's the lowest cost form of generation. It's a really good hedge against future generation costs. And a lot of companies and customers are asking for their utilities to purchase renewables. So our home is powered 100% by Kansas Wind, and I pay an extra $1 a month for that. We have corporate purchasers, such as we just announced, Amazon, Facebook, our corporate purchasers, T-Mobile. There's a wind farm out in Thomas County, Solomon Forks, and that's providing all of the power to all of T-Mobile's North American stores. We power Target and 150 Target stores across North America. Brown-Forman, the maker of Jack Daniels and other spirits. All of their facilities across North America are powered by a wind farm out in Colby. Microsoft, Google takes power off of a 200 megawatt wind farm in Clark County. Kohler, so your plumbing supply fixture company, and Royal Caribbean, if you're ever interested in going on a cruise, they take power off the Redding Wind Farm. So if you're interested in supporting companies that support Kansas, that's a good listing. As well as Landau Corporation, Spirit, Aerosystems. Spirit is actually taking purchase off of Evergy's Renewable Direct Tariff Program, but then they also are purchasing the power, 100% of the power off a new 99 megawatt wind farm being constructed in Kingman County called Flat Ridge 3. All of that power will go to Spirit. So Landau, Spirit, Cox Communications, many school districts, the Regents University, so KU, K-State, they're all going to be powered 100% by the Soldier Creek Wind Farm. Washburn and Washburn Tech, they're at 70% powered by Soldier Creek. So many other school districts as well, because of the fact that when they sign on the dotted line for that contract, they know that they know exactly what the cost of their electricity will be from day one through the end of that contract period. And in every case, they are saving the community money. Fort Hays State, when they put up turbines in 2013, they put up 2 turbines to help power their campus. And in fact, the turbines do help power the campus, and every year they save just about $1 million in electricity costs. So it really is financially advantageous for those communities and those corporate purchasers. So what's next? We do envision seeing additional renewables, probably not at the same pace on the wind side, just because we have other emerging technologies. We do anticipate some additional repowering of our existing wind farms in Kansas. And actually the repowering is beneficial because you can use, we're using newer technology. And so the project footprint can decrease. So some additional wind farms, we do anticipate seeing a lot more discussion related to solar, certainly battery storage. And then the next big one is green hydrogen. So on Tuesday, JP Morgan Chase announced that they're anticipating about $150 billion being spent in the United States in 2021, the year that we are in, $150 billion on clean energy technology. And so being able to capture a portion of that is going to be really important for our state going forward. We've always been the hub of economic development related to energy. So certainly hopeful that we are able to capture that. We have had a lot of conversation about the wind, about the February weather event, and certainly, we were very involved. Lots of different entities very involved in that February weather event. And I think it's really important for everyone in this committee to understand that that February weather event was very different for those in Texas and in Oklahoma than it was for us in Kansas. Certainly, we experienced the cold. Absolutely. We experienced prolonged cold, unprecedented cold for a historic number of days. So no one is discounting that. But we are in Southwest Power Pool. We are not in ERCOT. And our grid performed very differently because our grid was designed differently. And you heard Chuck Casely with Evergy stand up and talk about how, ERCOT is largely Texas, but SPP is the footprint of 14 states. And so, most of the SPP footprint, of course, was impacted by that cold weather event, which then, of course, did extend down into Texas. But in Kansas, our wind turbines have to be winterized. We pick certain turbine types because they have to handle 120-degree temperature swings every single year. So we have different types of turbines in use here in Kansas than they do down in Texas, and we also winterize them. So I'm not going to tell you that every single turbine, all 3,600 plus of them, performed exactly, were operational exactly on demand. But we did not have the trouble with our turbines the way that down in Oklahoma and Texas did, because they don't have the winterization packages. So when we talk with the guys and gals that work at the wind farms in our area, they were up and operating every single day. In some instances, you did have a little lubricant freeze up, but you had the guys climb the towers, get everything warmed up again, and the turbines were producing. So we did see decreases in production because we had this weather event, satellite image of the weather event, and it literally just stalled out right over the central portion of the United States, and the weather just was not moving. So the wind production was not as robust, but SPP will tell you that as they forecasted production for wind on Monday, production for wind on Tuesday, and production for wind on Wednesday, it came in exactly as forecasted. So renewables were certainly used and useful during that weather event. We helped keep the system up and going, but yes, production was less. But we certainly did not see any of the turbine failures or the outages that we're seeing down in Oklahoma and in Texas. So, and I'd be more than happy to elaborate on that. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
We might have just a couple real quick, and then if we have more, but does anybody have a question? Okay, Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Kimberly. You mentioned something there at the end about production. And Tuesday, we had some information provided by Ed Cross about the Texas wind power and so forth, how much it increased or decreased. But it seems like there's two different terms here that we're using, production and then there's capacity. And can you kind of explain that difference? Because I think sometimes they get interchanged, not intentionally, but it's easy to mix those up. Can you explain the differences there?
Absolutely. So production is exactly that. It's how much was being produced, how much was being generated. Capacity would be what is available. So a lot of times we talk about what is available to be put onto the grid. So when we talk about a 200 megawatt wind farm, we know that that project has the capability of producing up to 200 megawatts of wind. Now, due to a variety of factors, SPP may not call on that project to produce everything that it needs to produce. Because remember, SPP is taking into consideration the generation needs from customers from 14 states, balancing it with all of the different generation types across those 14 states. So whether it's nuclear, coal, natural gas, wind, solar, hydro, so they are responsible for doing all of that balancing. So just because you have the capability of producing a certain amount doesn't always mean that that full amount is called upon.
Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had some questions, but Ms., and I've always said Jen Coeur, I'm sorry. But
It's okay. I like
Ms.
that one better than Genscher.
But she covered all the questions that I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Delperdang?
Thank you. And just looking to try and clear something up here with following up on Rep. Schreiber's question, but when we looked at the Southwest Power Pool, and this may be beyond what you gave an answer, but during that crisis, the wind at some points were hitting like 1.7% of the production. So was the power pool deciding they did not want the wind in use? Or was it not available? Or what was going on there?
So, and I have to go back and look because I don't know that I've seen 1.7%. I don't think I've seen anything that low. I know that on average, we might see, thousands of megawatts on a typical February day. We might see thousands of megawatts of wind across that entire 14 state region. And remember, it's the panhandle of Texas. So we're talking the windiest place in Texas, all of Oklahoma, all of Kansas, all of Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, a little bit of Missouri. So you're talking truly the Saudi Arabia of wind. So I haven't seen numbers at that low for those particular days, but certainly, there were times where wind would be producing across that entire footprint, thousands of megawatts of wind. And I know that number was severely reduced as far as, and part of that was just due to the storm system. But, projects were still spinning and still operational, and the grid was handling, what it could. I mean, it was using everything that it could.
Keep in mind, thousands of megawatts is up in the gigawatt range. It's billions. So I don't know. We've got some snapshots of the power pool we was just watching. I'd love to have some answers.
So
on that. And I'm not
No.
directing at you. But.
No, and I mentioned this to several of the legislators right after the February weather event, that it would be fantastic to have Southwest Power Pool, Laney Nickel or Mike Ross come in. They were actually just down in Oklahoma at the Oklahoma Corporation Commission last week, and they provided fantastic data on exactly how every form of generation performed, how the entire SPP generation fleet performed. It was an outstanding presentation, and I think certainly the Kansas Corporation Commission, I'm sure, will be receiving that information soon specific to Kansas, but I think it would be extremely beneficial for every Kansas lawmaker to receive that. And I mentioned to the leadership of the House and Senate committees that I'd be more than happy to help facilitate those conversations so you can hear directly from them exactly what performance looked like.
Okay.
That's fantastic information.
Second question, just more of a comment, but I'm a huge fan of fuel cells and the future of hydrogen moving into this with how it plays with electric vehicles and stuff. So any information or info that you've got, I'd love to have just a stream coming in, because I really think that's going to be the future of the electric vehicle with a 5 or 10 minute fill up and go down the road some more type.
Many of the member companies are absolutely working on that and doing more than deploying like prototypes. I mean, this is where their business models are headed, along with green hydrogen, which is a complete and total game changer for the ag economy in the state.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll get that information, be sure.
If you guys that are standing in the back want to sit down at a chair, you're more than welcome to sit in those vacant chairs so you don't have to stand, okay? That gives us our social distancing and everybody's happy. Okay, next up, Representative Turner. Is yours answered? Representative Keither.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Kimberly, for your presentation. It was helpful, and I really was struck by the fact that the SPP wind forecast for the 3 days we were in the bitter cold was what was projected. And I'm very pleased to hear that, because SPP generally knows what they're doing, I believe. But Mr. Chairman, I really think that having Mike Ross or somebody come up from the SPP to tell us exactly what went on from their angle, I think would be really beneficial to the members of the committee, to educate us exactly what took place, because I think we may see this sometime again in our lifetime. So I think it would be interesting and to be better prepared to see what was coming, because I mean, we knew the forecast. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Kimberly.
And I agree. I would like to have the SSP come up, but with the COVID, we talked to them a little bit to see, and they weren't going to travel. So maybe we can do that next spring,
And they do presentations and whatnot. I think they appeared before the Oklahoma Commission remote.
Okay, seeing no other questions, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kimberly, thanks for being here. Being a school teacher, I would see all this technology, and I'm green. I like to think I'm really green, but I'd see all this new technology come into the school, and the schools would spend a lot of money. And the next year, something better would come out, and they would buy new stuff, and all that would go into the closet. And last week, I drove by Greenbush, and they had a couple acres of solar panels. And I'm thinking in 5 years, they're going to have solar panels that are twice as good, and they're going to replace them. And what are we going to do with these solar panels? It's almost like we're, if you bury these or whatever, you're undoing what wind energy does. Does that make sense?
No, I understand where you're coming from, Representative. And so this, I think at the end of the day, so we're talking, I think you're talking about kind of decommissioning and recycling and what are we doing with the things that are maybe not as useful going forward. But then also, go ahead, please.
I just think they'll be obsolete real quick because our technology is so good. In 2 years, they're going to be better, so they're going to want to replace them. So what are we going to do with the old ones and so forth?
So I read an article last night that the first transistor came in, when the first transistor for a transistor radio was built, was the size of an infant's palm, or the infant's hand. And in the back of an iPhone 12, they now have 12 billion transistors. So unequivocally, technology evolves and changes, and it improves, and that's all a very good thing. So I'm very thankful we had that first transistor and that we were able to learn from it and continue to develop new and better technology. I think we all learned a lot from the first 2 turbines that were placed in the state down at Jeffrey Energy Center. So, no one wants to be, well, not no one, but sometimes you don't want to be first, you want to be second, because you can learn from that first generation technology. And I think that there are organizations that are suited to be the first generation, and then they can move forward more quickly with replacement. But when we're talking about like our public institutions and public schools, I don't think that there's anything wrong with technology proving out a little bit more to make sure that they are getting something that is very viable and very economic and that does have a longer useful life. And I think that that's certainly something that is being worked on by a lot of school districts in the cities. I think that's the reason why you're now seeing school districts purchasing renewables now, as opposed to directly having renewables on site, but they're purchasing through these tariffs, because we've allowed a little bit of time for that technology and innovation and programming to come about. And so it truly is something that is saving them money now. But had they gotten in even 10 years ago, perhaps it would have been a little bit more risky of an investment. So I do think it is about timing, and there are organizations that are right-sized to be first generation and organizations to be right-sized to be second or third generation. That helps.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We need to move along here again, so thank you, Kimberly. Glad you could come. Good questions, everybody. Next up is the seismicity in Kansas. Number 1 speaker is Ralph Mundell. Ralph, welcome to committee. He's the Director of State Geological, KGS. Can you please state your name and who you're with?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, committee. Thanks for having me. My name's Dr. Rolf Mandel. I'm the state geologist and director of the Kansas Geological Survey. The KGS, it's a research and service division to the University of Kansas. And our mission is to study and report on the state's natural resources and hazards. We do not have any regulatory responsibility, and we do not take positions on policy. We do provide credible, science-based information that informs policy decisions. So with me today is Senior Scientist and Head of KGS's Geophysics Research Program, Dr. Rick Miller. Dr. Miller oversees the state's network of KGS-operated seismic stations and has been heavily involved with studying earthquakes in Kansas since 1980. For this information briefing, he's prepared a summary of seismic activity in south central Kansas and will focus on the recent earthquakes in Wichita. And so with that, Rick.
Thanks, Rolf. Mr. Chairman, committee, thank you for having me today. The focus, as Rolf indicated, of what I want to talk a little bit about today is the earthquakes, particularly the ones that occurred in Wichita recently. But to really put Wichita into context, I wanted to look at kind of a bigger picture. Barbara sent me a note. I sent actually the leads of these agencies a note saying that they had some time on the docket for today for looking at Wichita, Harper County, and South Hutchinson earthquakes. Just kind of an update to tell you where things are at. So basically, those red boxes are the areas of interest, and those will be the ones I'll focus on today. From a geologic perspective, basically, the question is, what's happening in the Sedgwick Basin? Because that's where these three areas all lie. So that's what we'll focus on, is the Sedgwick Basin area for today. To talk about earthquakes, you got to talk about recording. Back in 1977, the Geological Survey installed its first network. That was operational to 1989, and since that time, just a few U.S. geostations were in place until 2015, when under some partial funding from the KCC, we deployed a small temporary network in the south central part of the state. Currently, the KGS operates 30 earthquake stations throughout the state, and the USGS has 4 stations, 3 of which are useful for our applications. Harper County, I'll start with that. Harper County actually is a very promising story at this point in time. As you can see, in 2013 to 2014, when the USGS first started picking up significant earthquakes in that area, the dots on this map represent the magnitude of the earthquake. So you can see they were larger. The KGS basically then began deploying the network under partial funding from KCC, and then also through the legislature. And from 2015 to 2019, that's the center slide, you can see that's Harper and Sumner County covered by earthquakes. So that one's upwards of 10,000 earthquakes. And then between 2020 and 2021, the lower map shows a significantly reduced number of earthquakes and also size of earthquakes. So we want to talk about Harper County is we really have to look at it in terms of what's the history, what's going on, what's going to happen in the future. So the best way to do that is look at the past. So far, there have been 560 felt earthquakes in Harper and Sumner County. And so we laid out a map there, a histogram basically from 1900 all the way to 2021, actually 2036 on the map. And as you can see, basically, there was a relatively quiet part of the world until 2008 when they had their first earthquake. And then from somewhere in the 2013, 2014 time window, the number of earthquakes rapidly increased, and what's plotted on top of that is the annual injection volume of saltwater disposal. And so you can see that the correlation between the earthquakes and the saltwater disposal was not lost on KCC and the rest of the agencies that are monitoring this. And so you can see that there was some things put in play, which I'm sure Ryan can talk about, Ryan Hoffman from the KCC, but as the volumes decrease as a combination of regulation in place and also decrease in oil price, the number of earthquakes began dropping off quite rapidly. As you can see on the map there from 2020, we're down to very few earthquakes that basically are above 3.0. And so they're smaller earthquakes and there's much fewer of them. So the trend is actually heading in the right direction. We don't see any reason this trend is going to change. So we feel that as time goes on, if nothing else changes in association with exterior influences, that this trend of earthquakes in Sumner and Harper County will gradually return to a fairly low level of occasional felt events. Reno County, of course, was been very active since 2016. You can see there on the map from between 2015 and 2021, there have been 174 earthquakes. And so we look back and say, okay, well, what's driving it to have all of a sudden occurred in this place? We looked at the pressures in the Arbuckle, the fluid pressure in the Arbuckle. And as you can see on this plot, this is the average fluid pressure on the Arbuckle in Reno County. You can see basically in about 2012, we started from a fairly oscillating curve, and it kind of changed the gradient and began to increase pressure quite rapidly. And since that time, it's kind of leveled off. As a matter of fact, it might even in the last year or so begin maybe to start to drop a little bit, which is a good sign, because pore pressure basically is what is a primary driver for induced earthquakes. So if you look at it in terms of what's happened across this particular swarm of earthquakes, this histogram shows you basically from the time the earthquake started sometime in late 2016 to today. The blue line above is basically the injection history for the Hutchinson area for a 15-mile radius. So we're looking at this cluster of earthquakes that are within 15 miles of the main Hutchinson cluster there in South Hutchinson, and also any injection that goes on in that particular same radius of activity. You can see the fluid injection has been relatively stable. There's ups and downs in it, but that's part of operational issues. And so there's always a bit of a sawtooth to that curve, but for the most part, it's been pretty flat. And so we saw an increase in seismicity 2016. We started to die off. And last year, on February 11th, this same committee asked us to come talk about the 4.9 magnitude event that occurred in South Hutchinson on January the 19th. And at that time, Representative Carmichael made the comment that he was tired of getting shaken out of bed. When's this going to stop? And so I told him basically, I thought that it was coming to an end. It looked like we're tailing off in terms of the size of events and also the magnitudes. And as of today, that has actually begun to occur. So we're really glad that for a change, we're able to actually put all these pieces together and it starts to make sense. We've had one magnitude 2.7, which was in February of this year, but other than that, it's been extremely quiet, and we believe, based on the data so far, that will continue into the future for a ways until or unless something changes in terms of other influences. Okay, let's talk about Wichita. That's been, of course, the hotspot for the last 4 months. It's generated a lot of controversy, a lot of concern. It couldn't be located in a worse place as far as felt and as far as disturbing the public, because that is basically a very populous part of the state there. So the dots on the map there between 2015 and October 2020, the dark dots are the earthquakes that were recorded during that period of time, and then the light blue dots are the ones from November 20 until March of 2021. You can see basically where that cluster all lies. They're larger events, they're focused, they're in about a 10 or so square mile area. Basically, they have a reasonably decent trend to them, so we think we got a pretty good idea what the fault orientation or faults are oriented here. And so that's kind of what we're looking at as far as in terms of a background of what we're going to look at now, which is what's going on here. So basically, what we've done is we've got 2 stations actually that we operate in Sedgwick County, so that gives us a really good viewpoint of this. And so we look at a 2-mile radius, just kind of looking around that particular cluster of events, and there's 64 earthquakes that have occurred in that 2-mile radius since May of 2016. And as you can see on the plot there, we've had several magnitude 2, 2.2s, and so even smaller events down to 1.5 that have occurred during that period within that 2-mile radius. But they were small. We knew they were going on. They basically actually align with a different trend than these current earthquakes are even on. So we don't think that these are even related. Then, of course, late November, around Thanksgiving time of 2020, we saw the large increase of events that everyone felt and they're aware of. So if we look at it in terms of, let's back up a little bit. Let's look at it in terms of the way we look at earthquakes in other areas, which is what's the Arbuckle pressure doing? What are the history of earthquakes? And let's look out 15 miles and look. So you can see the plot there on the left for the histogram basically shows earthquakes, the same one I showed earlier. And then on the right, you're seeing the upper plot, you're seeing the earthquakes within 15 miles. So all the way back into January of 2015, there have been earthquakes within 15 miles of this epicenter. There have been some that have been felt. Of course, 15 miles, you're getting out quite a ways. You're getting over into Butler County and way down the southern part of the state in areas that are less populated. So we look at the Arbuckle pressures, and we can see that basically somewhere around 2003, we start to see a gradual increase, and somewhere in 2011, the rate of increase in pressure increased quite a bit until about 2016, when we think we're seeing it level off. So we thought, based on 2016 and to current data, that the pressures in the Arbuckle have begun to stabilize a bit, which is actually a good sign. So then came the earthquakes from Thanksgiving to January the 4th. And that sequence of events, basically, when it first occurred, it made sense to me. It made sense as a natural sequence, because this particular area of Wichita has seen 3 earthquakes of magnitude 3 prior to that. There were 2 events in 1919. There was 1 event in 1948 that were magnitude 3s. Those are felt reports. So we know there's seismicity in the area. So to have a magnitude 2.7 occur on Thanksgiving or thereabouts was not a surprise. It looked like a natural event. It felt like it. Everything was consistent with it. And then we went 10 days and we had another event. This time it was a magnitude 3.3. Well, even that, you know, that's not what I would have expected, but still it's within, you're thinking of a period between 1990 and 1948 of 30 years. So yeah, we were probably overdue, and yeah, that could be another event. But then we had the third event that occurred, 3.7, another 10 days. And all of a sudden, this starts looking a little bit funny because we're seeing 10-day cycles. And then we went another 10 days, and we had the magnitude 3.9. At that point, we started some serious discussions with KDH&E and KCC in terms of this does not look like a natural sequence. And if you plot it out, the plot on the right with magnitudes, you can see almost a linear increase in magnitudes of events and spaced about 10 days apart. And you can almost predict the next event to be January 9th. That didn't occur, which was good, which means whatever is happening that caused the sequence of events has basically expended most of its energy or has reached a point where the pressure no longer are causing the faults to be susceptible. So with that, we said, okay, what's the probability of this being a natural sequence? So you look at it in terms of just basic probability, and this is statistics. And of course, this is a very, very undersampled data set, so we don't have a lot of statistics. But if we try to apply some degree of seismicity in terms of earthquake prediction onto this, we say, okay, well, we had 2 earthquakes in 1919, 2 earthquakes in 1948, and we've had quite a few then, 17 plus, that have occurred in this 4-month window. So then we go through and we do what's called declustering, which means every main event usually has 4 shocks and aftershocks. So we take those out. Let's just look at the main event. And so we've had 2 events, and one in 1919, one in 1948. We've had 5 events that have occurred in the 4-month window between the end of November and the 1st of March. So we put the statistics to that, and it determines that the first event, the one that occurred around Thanksgiving, has a 99.9% chance of being natural because we're overdue. We've been 73 years without an earthquake in this area. It has been on a 30-year cycle previously. We were overdue for an earthquake. So that one makes sense. Now, a second event within that same 4-month window to occur again, it goes to a 3.2%, which is the normal percentage probability for an earthquake in that area. During any 4-month period of time in that area of Wichita, you could expect about a 3.2% chance of having a natural earthquake. So the second one, okay, it's a little bit quicker than we thought, but it's within natural. Now, as we get into the 3rd, 4th, and 5th, the statistics could go really in the wrong direction, to where by the time we had the 5th event, which was beginning of March, statistically, there's no probability for that to be natural. It breaks outside of the natural sequence. So that basically is kind of where we started to dig hard into this investigation we're on. So we started looking, and then the questions came, how big is this thing going to get? How big are we going to get? So far, the last event was the largest event. It was a 4.0, so we're gradually getting bigger and bigger. So we did what's called a Gutenberg-Richter relationship, and I won't get into the details of that, but what it basically is, it's a method by which we can say how many magnitude 1s, how many magnitude 2s, how many 3s we would expect to see on a particular fault area over a certain period of time. So we use that relationship, and if we look for just the 54 events that occurred in that Thanksgiving window, we're saying that basically the line intersects at about 4.2 to 4.5 as the maximum sized earthquake that we would expect to see based on what we've seen so far. If we pull in the 15-mile radius, then again, we're looking at about 4.1 to 4.3 maximum magnitude for an earthquake in this area based on the events we have so far. Now, that basically is the data we have so far. And with earthquakes, they don't follow any kind of a pattern. So this 10-day pattern was a little bit of an anomaly, but earthquakes don't follow a pattern. And so it's basically based on large window statistics. And so at this point in time, if we look at it in terms of what we think on the data we have currently, that we do not expect to see anything larger than 4.5 on this particular cluster of earthquakes. I would really be surprised to see something that big, actually. But nevertheless, statistically, that is the outside limit of the possibilities. So, but that's what the data we have so far. And again, this is just, statistics are only as good as the data. You can twist statistics however you want to twist them. But that's what we have, the best we can tell. Now, we look at, again, since basically this beginning to look less and less like natural sequence, we started looking at basically disposal because we know from the south central part of the state, that was a big player back in 2015 through, actually 2014 through 2017. So basically, we have the earthquakes that have occurred in the Wichita area since 2015. On the other side, we have the disposal wells that were licensed in 2019. So then we do what was called a diffusivity, hydraulic diffusivity, which basically all that boils down to is if you have a pressure, a certain pressure front moving through, how fast will it move? For the weather people, it's how fast is that front going to move that Arctic chill came through, when's it going to stop and how's it going to move, depends on the conditions locally. Same thing in the subsurface. How fast a pressure pulse or pressure front will move depends on this diffusivity. And so for this area of the state, we have a number that we've selected that's reasonable for the area. And we say basically so that if we're looking for some cause, if we look out 6 miles, anything that happens 6 miles out will show up at the epicenter in about 1 month. Anything that happens 14 miles up will show up in about 6 months. So how long will it take that wave to gradually make its way to where these faults are that are critically stressed? And so that kind of gives us what to look for and how far out to look in terms of anything that may be suspect for inducing the activities. So now we look at the disposal volumes. Basically, we go into the Wichita area and say, okay, well, we have 2 different types of disposal industries here. One's the Class 1 and one's the Class 2. The Class 1 volumes are reported daily. And so this curve you're seeing here basically has the fine resolution and the sawtooth appearance of what you'd expect to see in daily reporting of disposal volumes. And so you can see that from all the way back to January of 2020, the rates are reasonably consistent. There's a lot of variability associated with operational issues. But then the earthquakes occur basically late November, and then they're pretty strong through that window. So we don't see anything out in front there that really stands out strong as a key indicator of something that's unusual or that is pulsing. Because pulsing will actually, we've seen that in several different areas in the literature where if you immediately stop or immediately start or you pulse the system like this, once it gets to the triggering thresholds, it will trigger off events. So we haven't seen anything there. So then we look at Class 2 disposals, and those are reported monthly. And so the curve is much smoother, and you can see there the April 2020 part of the curve is where the price of oil dropped dramatically, so you would expect to see a decrease in disposal. And so, but for the most part, they've recovered back to where they were, pre-pandemic. And again, there's nothing there that really is strongly suggestive of what could be causing or instigating or triggering these earthquakes. So basically, in order to put the 2 together to make it one county-wide activity, we averaged out on a sliding monthly basis of the Class 1s, and you get something that looks like this. So in front of this set of earthquakes, we see several minor undulations in this disposal volume, but we don't see anything that looks like what would be the spiking that we would expect to see in order to have it stimulate this kind of events or some sort of a sequential pulsing of some kind. So right now, we're looking at the data. I know that the KCC is asking for more data. We're trying to analyze it, trying to figure out what's going on. We're trying to see if there's anything that could have happened that could have caused this. The pressure obviously has risen in this area to where we are now at or beyond the triggering threshold, which means even slight things that we used to do all the time may trigger earthquakes. So to kind of bring this to a close, Wichita cluster, we don't have any smoking gun. There's nothing here that really says dramatically that if it was induced, what caused it. Statistically, it looks as though it's an induced activity because it just does not match the natural record. We're very early in the process, and we've only recently received some of the injection numbers, so we're still working with them. We're trying to integrate all these data. And so at this point in time, because we have different entities involved, the data is spatially, temporally, and statistically it's an undersampled problem. We don't have enough data in the right places, in the right temporal pattern, the sampling frequencies to really be able to do a really good job of integrating this stuff. And then also the processes are very inconsistent in terms of methodologies, in terms of reporting and so forth. And so that makes it challenging to try to integrate all these data sets. The Hutchinson cluster basically responded how we expected it would based on our discussions last year. So I'm happy to report that to Representative Carmichael that we were able to now, he may not sleep any better because of the Wichita cluster, but at least it's not the Hutchinson cluster causing him his nighttime problems now. And seismicity in Harper and Sumner County is basically acting as we would expect it to do based on the reduced injection volumes. It's beginning to bring smaller numbers and magnitudes of earthquakes. And I would say basically our study and our understanding basically is that from the information that we do have, that basically in the last 10 years, the pressures in the Sedgwick Basin, which is that area I showed earlier, has likely exceeded triggering thresholds, which means that this may not be the last place that we see clusters like this of earthquakes go off, or we've not seen them recently, or at a rate that we've not recently seen. And that's because we believe that a lot of the area have reached a pressure that things that used to the cumulative injection basically has pushed this region to where things that we used to be able to do routinely as part of industrial processes now may trigger earthquakes. We just don't know because this is new territory that we've moved this pressure field into. Hopefully we're seeing good trends in the pressure and it will begin to drop off. So that would be really good news. And also, we've a lot of these all these faults that have been triggered have been critically stressed for a long time. And so a lot of this energy is being moved away. So with that, I'll stop so that my other co-speakers have a chance to talk about this.
Okay, we have one person ask a question, but I'd like to go through the other three presenters real quick, and then we have all the time in the world. Would that be acceptable for you, Mr. Carmichael?
Absolutely. A good idea,
All right, thank
Mr.
you.
Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sounds like you guys did a lot of research anyway. Up next, Rick Miller. Oh, that was Rick. Okay, yeah, that's right. I was trying to look for Ryan Hoffman. Ryan, welcome to the committee. Director of Conservation District, KCC. Please state your name and who you're with, please.
My name is Ryan Hoffman. I am the Director of the Conservation Division of the Kansas Corporation Commission. As most of you probably know, the Kansas Corporation Commission is headquartered here in Topeka, but the Conservation Division that regulates the oil and gas industry is headquartered in Topeka or in Wichita by statute. I think Rick did a good job of kind of giving you all the historical perspective, so I will focus primarily on those three areas and talk about what the commission has done and what the commission is currently doing in those areas. As I mentioned, we do regulate the oil and gas industry. We're talking about disposal wells. There are currently 16,457 Class II wells that are regulated by the KCC. We are the third largest UIC, or underground injection control program, in the nation. The majority of those wells are not large volume disposal wells. More than 11,000 of those wells are located in eastern Kansas, and they're less than 1,000 feet deep. They are used for enhanced oil recovery purposes, not disposal. But there are roughly 2,500 arbuckle or deeper disposal wells in Kansas, and that's generally what we're looking at when we're talking about induced seismicity. Well, in Harper County, as you recall, and Rick showed, the increase in disposal volume was concurrent with the increase in oil production that came about with the Mississippi line play development with the horizontal wells. We saw a dramatic increase in the volume of fluids that were produced, and that was good for the oil production, but it wasn't good for the disposal volumes. So in response to the rising seismicity and the emergency conditions that were created, the commission opened a docket. In that docket, they reduced volumes within 5 specific areas. There were 23 wells that were impacted by those reductions. Those 23 wells also had to confirm their total vertical depth. They had to drill back or plug back up out of the basement into the arbuckle. And the commission instituted daily reporting requirements that would be filed once a month. That order stayed in place for about another year, and then in September, I think it was September of 2016, the commission extended the area where there were volume reductions. So they set a 16,000 barrel per day limit outside of those original 5 areas into parts of Sedgwick, Barber, Sumner, and Harper County. And then most recently, in September of 2019, the commission essentially found that given the conditions that Mr. Miller has laid out, their power to act on an emergency basis no longer existed. And when I say that, the number of earthquakes in that area where they had their order was down from 44.2 a day or per month, I'm sorry, in 2016 to 9 in 2019. So the number and magnitude of the earthquakes had greatly decreased, but at the same time, the Mississippi line play had gone away. Pretty much the number of horizontal wells drilled during that time was 360 from 2011 to 2019, but only 13 of those came after 2016. So the volumes of fluid that were being produced went away. So there was no need for the disposal. Then in Reno County, I think Rick has covered that very well. When the earthquake started there, we did our initial seismic action response, which is we looked for any Class 2 activity within 6 miles of those earthquakes. There weren't any. After consultation with KGS, we went out to the 15-mile area. The commission did open an investigative docket to keep the public informed of what we're seeing. So on a quarterly basis, we report on the seismicity and the injection totals in that area. And based on what we've seen, we have not made any recommendations for regulatory action. And then with Sedgwick County, that's like Rick said, that's kind of been the hot spot. And as somebody who lives in Wichita, I'd prefer it wasn't. But I can tell you that when this started, we did what I just mentioned, which was our Induced Seismicity Task Force Seismic Action Plan response, and that was we looked 6 miles out. There were originally 4, and then as the earthquakes moved, 5 wells, Class 2 wells within that search area. There was nothing that really stood out, and at that time, in December, as Rick mentioned, the earthquake still appeared to be on that natural trend. And then we met with KGS sometime in early January to discuss these concerns. And during that time, we agreed, along with our counterparts at KDHE, to go out 15 miles and search 15 miles. So what we found is we have 61 Class 2 wells within that 15-mile search area around Wichita. And roughly for 2020, there was over 14.8 million barrels disposed of into the Arbuckle from those wells. That was down from 2019, obviously, because of the pandemic. It was down about 3.8 million barrels from 2019. When it comes to large volume wells and wells that are permitted for a lot of volume, there really are about 20 that would qualify based on the commission's prior findings as large volume. But really, when it comes to actual disposal volumes as opposed to permit values, there really is only one that has been putting in more than 5,000 barrels per day. So as Rick said, there's not really a smoking gun per se, but nonetheless, with I would say under the advice from KGS, we have reached back out to our operators to get that daily data dating back to these timeframes to see if there was anything that happened 6 months prior, and then even more recently with the recent earthquakes in March. Having said that, I'll do as Rick did, and I'll stand and ask or answer questions at the end, if that's all right with the chairman.
Yes, let's get through the last, and then we can have all the question time we need, okay? Thank you. Tom Stiles, Director, Bureau of Water, KDHE. Tom? Are you online?
There. There, Mr. Chairman, are you seeing me?
There we go. We see you.
All right, very good. Thank you to you and the committee for entertaining me through the virtual network. I'm hoping legislative staff got the quick PowerPoint from KDHE to display for the committee. If not, I think maybe I can try to share my screen and run it from here. I'll share. Let's see. All right. Mr. Chairman, are you seeing my slides?
Yes, we see your slides.
All right, very good. Let me introduce myself. I'm Tom Stiles. I'm Director, Bureau of Water at Kansas Department of Health and Environment. Bureau of Water regulates among others, the Class 1 injection wells under the Underground Injection Control Program delegated to KDHE by EPA. What I want to do, a quick census of the Class 1 program in the state, and then focus a little bit on both Reno and Sedgwick counties. Class 1s typically are municipal or industrial injectors of a variety of processes, but predominantly the fluid that's injected down to the Arbuckle Formation is heavy, dense brine that has no purpose on the surface and certainly can't be discharged into the surface waters of the state. We have 50 such wells located throughout the state. This is the inset map is the counties where we have class 1 wells. And it's a little bit of a somewhat of a crescent distribution among the counties from the Kearney, Finney area on up to Johnson County, where the Deffenbaugh operation is. Majority of them lie in south central Kansas, however. The bar graph displays by county the 2020 total injection volume from these wells. And really we have our big four, Reno, Rice, McPherson, and Sedgwick, dominate the amount of volume that's been injected down to the Arbuckle. Reno is a unique situation in that the city of Hutchinson itself comprises a vast majority of the injected volume down to the Arbuckle through its 2 class 1 wells. And I'll touch a little bit more back on Reno and Hutch in a moment. This is the distribution of injection volume by facilities. And again, you see the distribution in the inset map of where the facilities are. But again, we have a big four of the city of Hutch, the CHS refinery up in McPherson, Occidental Chemical on south Sedgwick County, and then Compass Minerals in Rice County. And then we see a tailing off of the injected volumes from a variety of the other facilities scattered throughout the state. All told about 86 million barrels injected over the year. Reno County, fairly flat. I think Rick has indicated some of that as well, but overall fairly flat. A very slight uptick in 2019 that reflected the flooding conditions that essentially ruined the brine for a number of the facilities that utilize that brine for management of an exchange of hydrochemical product in the underlying salt caverns. The flooding conditions diluted the brine sufficiently that it couldn't be used to displace the product in those caverns, and would have began to erode the integrity of those caverns. And so it was the facilities disposed of that brine through their respective class 1 wells there. But we have preached a path of continuing to try to reduce the volume of injection, and we saw a marked downturn in volume in 2020 from our facilities located within the county. For Sedgwick County, and this is principally Occidental Chemical, and over the course of the last 2 decades, it's on a slight downward trend of injected volumes there to where it now is in the vicinity of about 15 million barrels injected over the course of the year. And the other component, Ebonic, which is a very small operation there in the county. But those are the 2 class 1 operations that lie within the 15-mile radius circle that KGS has outlined relative to the position to the epicenter of the Wichita quakes. Quick census of, again, what we are, as Ryan indicated, as the large participation in operations we have for class 2, class 1. We're number 4 in the country with our 50 wells injecting, again, about 86 million barrels annually in there. Because of our requirements under the Safe Drinking Water Act and the delegation of the UIC program for class 1s, we have a number of requirements expected upon our permitted operations. Injection volumes are continually recorded within each day by day, and then reported back to the state on a monthly basis with redundancy and being able to capture those data. Our injection throughout the class 1 program has all been gravity fed. We've never utilized pressure to induce injection. And then we also require within the each 5-year period, if not annually, attributes of the receiving geologic formation where the fluids are going. These include bottom hole pressures at the bottom of the well, static fluid levels, the mechanical integrity tests of the well casings and well structure, as well as assessing the density and composition of the fluids that are disposed of. And when we dispose through a Class 1 operation, it essentially sends that fluid to extinction. We won't bring that back up. Which gets to our other policy and adjustments that we've made. We continue to push on our facilities to make sure that what gets sent down to extinction through their Class 1 wells is really suitable for permanent disposal, that there is no purpose nor outlet up on the surface to being able to do that. That brings us to the issue of Hutchinson, which actually is through their disposal of their reverse osmosis reject water for their public water supply. All things considered, within the realm of Class 1s is relatively fresh, and we've looked at it and it's cleaned up sufficiently now to where we're working with the city to get them out of the Class 1 business and be able to entertain them discharging again to the surface and ultimately to the Ark River. We want anything we got disposed, we want to be again in that heavy, dense brine constitution, and nothing that has the outline of being able to be replenished and maintain its presence within the surface hydrologic cycle. Waste minimalization is being preached to again our operations to report on how to do that. That yields benefits in terms of overall volume reductions. And then finally, as Rick indicated, the other thing we have preached is in their operations, don't pulse. Don't create large abrupt changes in injection volume, either increases or abruptly shutting off, but to stair step down or stair step up the injected volumes there to not shock the system and potentially trigger the seismic event. That's a quick synopsis, Mr. Chair, and I think now we can open up for the committee to question all the conferees. Thank you.
All right, thank you. First on our list was this frequent question, Miles, Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to express my appreciation to all of our conferees here today. When I came to the committee, I think a lot of us felt like we were working in the dark. We didn't have very many seismic monitors. These were new phenomenon. And because of the 4 people we've heard from today and some others, I do actually sleep a lot easier these days than I did back in 2014 before we had the monitoring system and before we had scientists like we've heard from today. And so I have 1,000 questions, but my main statement, if you will, is the science is satisfying me to the point that even though not all my constituents agree, I'm feeling pretty safe right now. And so I just want to extend my thanks to everyone involved for gathering the data and applying the good science and sharing it with us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Carmichael, Representative Carmichael. Any other questions? Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if I could ask Mr. Miller or Dr. Miller. Now, when we were hearing from Mr. Hoffman, I think one of the questions answered, but I was questioning the number or how many injection wells in Sedgwick County specifically. But I think he mentioned there was several there. I wasn't sure if there was or not.
That'd be Ryan's question there. I don't have the
I'm
exact
gonna
number.
lead
I take
into
number
one
of earthquakes, but I'm not very good about the wells.
Yeah, but what I was leading to was with the Arbuckle pressure that you talked about. What drives that? Is it strictly the injection well process, or is there other factors occurring that, because when you put that chart up, it looked like in 2011, it took a big jump on the pressures. I'm just trying to figure out what's happening since 2011 there.
Well, basically, the Arbuckle itself is a system that basically extends from Oklahoma all the way up through Kansas and into Missouri. So it's a huge system. It's very well divided according to the geologic provinces in terms of kind of the controls associated with it. So there are some natural effects that go on associated, but they're over time frames that are quite significant. These kind of time frames in terms of these pressure changes are predominantly coming from additional fluid being added on top. That's what's driving up the volume. That's what drives up the pressures. It's just like anything. The more water you put in, the greater the pressure is at the bottom of the pool. And that's what's kind of what we see going on here is cumulatively, we've put so much water in Oklahoma and Kansas that we've driven that pressure up. And some of the changes we're seeing now are associated with reductions due to regulation, but also reductions due to reduced production because of price changes. So that's what we see this leveling off. And so basically the goal, the hope is that will stabilize those pressures. And if we do, maybe we'll drive that triggering threshold up above that level so we won't be triggering these earthquakes when little things happen that are part of normal business.
So it may have been irrelevant whether the injection wells are in Sedgwick County or not. It sounds like the Arbuckle runs all down through Oklahoma. And so what's being injected there affects essentially what's going on in Sedgwick County then.
Well, there's a limited amount of reach that you'll have from an Arbuckle injecting well. There's been studies that said that you put a lot of fluid in and you'll gradually see, kind of, it's kind of like a very slow movement of pressure and therefore static fluid levels. But normally, the greatest distance we've ever even heard of that's published in the literature that you have a influence is usually in that 50-mile range. Most publications associated with injectivity, whether it be from Arkansas or Colorado, these ones that have been published, usually in that 5 to 10 kilometer range or 4 to 7 mile range. But there is the possibility that a cumulative effect, a very large diffusion could come for greater distances. And that's what kind of keeping it up, because we're seeing places that there is no injection to speak of going on, but the wells are increasing in static fluid level and pressure. So there is an influence. It's a very complicated system and very hard to tell where it's all coming from, but it can come from quite some distance.
So is it more of a question of the pressures present in it, or is it the lubrication factor that the fluids cause down in there?
Well, it's been described as lubricating the fault because that's easy to conceptualize, but in reality, it's pore pressure change. It's changes in those, because those faults are held by clamping pressure. In order for an earthquake to occur, you have to have a fault. It has to be aligned properly with the stress field, and you have to have natural stresses on it that are at the critical point. And then we simply change the pore pressure, which overcomes that clamping pressure and lets it slip. So that's the process. So what we're doing is we're changing those pore pressures of a fault that's already stressed and waiting to go over its natural period, and we just triggered it off, pushed it off.
Thank you.
Representative Mason. Okay, Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This might be for, well, first one might be for Dr. Miller again. We're talking about pressures in the Arbuckle. The difference between Class 1 and Class 2 wells, the data as far as injections are reported daily or monthly. With pressures, is that taken at the same time, or is that just done monthly, annually?
Yeah, the pressure data is, we get the pressure data from Class 1 wells. As Tom Stiles indicated during his talk, the Class 1 wells do a whole variety of testing in their wells quite regularly, and one of those is bottom hole pressures. And so that's where we're getting the pressure information from, is these very, very sparsely spaced 50 or so wells that they have out there where they actually do pressure measurements. So we've got a spatially undersampled, so we're interpolating a lot in order to get some information, but the pressure all comes from Class 1s during our normal testing.
And what's the frequency of those?
They usually, Tom can probably answer this better, but they usually test about once a year.
Okay.
If we usually get numbers. They do more extensive testing, larger. And I know the Class 2 also have mechanical integrity tests they do to test the casings. And Ryan can talk to that issue. But I know the pressure data we get is predominantly coming out of the Class 1 community.
Okay, thank you. And then Ryan, I have a question for you. You had mentioned that Kansas has the largest number of disposal wells?
Third largest.
Third largest.
Third largest Class 2 program in the nation. Class 2, the Underground Injection Control Program is part of the Safe Drinking Water Act. There are 6 classes of injection wells. Class 2 are the oil and gas waste related ones. So that's when I say the third largest, we're talking about
Okay.
just those.
I missed the word third, so.
That's all right.
Anyway, that's what I needed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Berkowitz.
Yes, thank you. I have a question about the faults that are in the Wichita area, and are they faults being newly identified because of the activity, like say in eastern Wichita? Is that identifying new faults, or is it just showing activity on previously known faults?
This earthquake activity that's occurred since 2014 in the state is showing us faults we had no idea existed. If you look at the classic geological survey map of basement faults, it was done by Cole in 1976, so it's an old map. There's very few faults that are actually mapped to be present in this part of Sedgwick County. Matter of fact, on that map, there aren't any. There have been some more recent mapping that says there may be some, but the faults that are there, you can't have an earthquake without a fault. And so these earthquakes, as they line up on these trends, are showing us where these faults are. And so they're actually, this particular cluster of earthquakes is lined up on a T of what appears to be two faults that we had no idea were there. It's not unusual to have them there because you're right on the backside of that major Humboldt Fault, Nemaha Ridge sequence. So that it is previously a tectonically active area. So there would be faults there. We just have no way of knowing they're there until we have an earthquake or we get oil and gas data or we can map them or seismic data.
So is it pretty exciting in your industry to be able to draw maps?
Well, that's kind of a loaded question because it takes the uncomfortableness of an earthquake for us to be able to map it. So it's not comfortable for people experiencing them, but from a geologic and geophysical perspective, this is a gold mine of data.
And I remember, I mean mostly in being able to more identify the risks of an area when you actually discover that it's there. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You bet. Any other questions?
If I
have
might.
one or two.
If I might, Mr. Chair.
Representative
I'm
Carmichael.
sorry. I'll make it quick and thank you. Mr. Miller, or excuse me, Dr. Miller, you've explained to me previously why you believe we are actually not at risk for catastrophic events in Kansas like occur in California. Could you explain that to us quickly so that folks' concerns might be alleviated that we're probably not going to have a catastrophic quake?
Yeah, in order to get a large major magnitude earthquake, you have to have the fault structures and the stress in place to be able to do that. And the best way that we have of being able to determine what the potential for a major earthquake is, and major earthquakes basically are get up into the 6.5 to 7 range where you're talking about major structural damage. We look at the recursion relationship, which is what earthquakes have we had in the past? What do we have that are potential areas of concern? In Kansas, we have no quaternary faulting present at the surface. So we have no place on the surface where there is actually a fault that shows it has had an earthquake in the last million years that has had surface expression. All of our faults and earthquakes are coming from in the basement, in the Precambrian, the deep part of the rock. And we basically, the largest earthquake in Kansas was in 1867. It was estimated to be about a 5.2. Of course, that was 1867. It was via newspaper reports and so forth that we got that information. So if you look at the entire historical record plus the data we've recorded since that time, and we can tie it back to our natural events, we don't have the sufficient number of magnitude 5s and 4s to suggest that we could possibly have something as large as a 6 down the road. We just don't have the structures. We don't have the tectonic or seismic history that says that we're going to see something that large. It just does not have that type of a potential tectonic environment in Kansas.
Representative Keither.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I sure appreciate that information, but I think it was over a 4.0 that originated in Oklahoma that shook my 100-year-old home in Topeka, Kansas, and I think it was felt as far away as Chicago. So even though we may not have a big quake of 6.0 or more, we have had earthquakes that have done damages to homes. So I think a lot of the concern with these earthquakes is just that. I mean, we've had a lot of people throughout the state that have had damage done to structures and homes, businesses. And so I think we're all eager for someplace to point a finger to figure out how we can fix this, but I don't hear that today. I do hear a lot of good research and data being done, and I appreciate that. At one point in the presentation, there was a remark about the wells around Reno and such that the words exterior influences were made. And what are exactly exterior influences?
To their own way. Got backwards there. What I was referring to when I said exterior influence is basically that, as was pointed out before by, I think Tom Stiles mentioned it, which is that we're working real hard with a lot of the operators who, and this is true of the Class 2 as well, but it's not quite as obvious in terms of the operational. When we, one of the most well-documented cases of induced seismicity occurred with Rocky Mountain Arsenal back in the 1980s. Where they were injecting, and they started having earthquakes, 7 to 10 miles away, and they had a continuous level of earthquakes. And then once they equated the problem back to the disposal going on in the Rocky Mountain Arsenal on the Front Range, they immediately shut off that disposal. So they went from injecting at a high volume to injecting zero. That pulse basically traveled to the system, and they had the largest earthquake they ever had shortly after that pulse. So what we're trying to do as far as exterior influences is since we appear to have reached this triggering threshold where we haven't been here before, this is a new place for us in terms of the subsurface. We're at a triggering threshold now that is a cumulative effect from a lot of water going in for a long period of time. Now things that we do in terms of normal operations, which may mean shut-ins, may mean starting and stopping pumps or dramatically making changes associated with what we're doing operationally, could be an influence that could trigger an event. So if we continue on the path we're on, which is a very well-informed and uniform injection processes, then we don't have those exterior influences. When we have something that happens that is very abrupt to the system, that's when we can have something that occurs that we would hope that we can avoid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, don't move yet, Rick. Got a question? Any other questions? Okay, I've got a couple. Just some just informational ones for me. About what is the normal level of those where they inject it to below grade?
Well, that's probably a good question for Ryan or Tom, but basically from the data that we have, most of the Arbuckle injectors will drill down to the top of the Arbuckle and then be open hole below that. So they're injecting basically anywhere within as deep as their well goes. Some of these wells only go a couple 100 feet into the Arbuckle. Some of these wells go all the full 1,000+ feet into the granite wash below. As Ryan talked about, we're trying to plug most of those back into the Arbuckle so they don't have that open access to the granite wash. But for the most part, if they case off just at the top of the Arbuckle, they could be injecting anywhere within 1,000 feet of the Arbuckle. So it's not really distinct, just simply in the Arbuckle.
Okay. And the level from Oklahoma, say, to Hutchinson, that was the cause, concerns years ago. Is that a pretty much level from north to south, or is it an elevation or a decrease in elevation from where they inject them?
Well, basically what we're looking at as far as the pressures go are simply a relative pressure change within particular wells, because there simply is no way to equate all the way across the entire system. And so, I mean, it isn't like the top of a lake or something where you got a nice clean. So basically what we do is we look at relative change and relative stability in the different wells we have measurements in. And so we can tell when we see an increase in a well, and then we can see where we see an increase in a different well and the timing between the two and those kind of things.
And final question is, between those locations, there's no free flow. It has to be pressurized to make it move one direction or the other. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're moving. This is basically the movement of fluid in a rock. And so it has to go through areas of permeability, which are fractures or pores. And so it's a flow. It's not going to be uniform. It's going to have natural barriers where it's going to stop. So it's going to be a very irregular. There really is no way to predict what's happening. It is about the Arbuckle is about as complex of a system as there is in the subsurface.
Okay. So basically, pressure has to be moving it, whether it's static or made pressure.
Yeah, basically, anytime you move anything within a fluid system, you have to have a driving pressure.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And I want to thank you guys, everybody present today. You did a great job. Had a lot of good questions. This will probably be our last meeting for this. I don't think we'll be meeting at all next week unless there's conference committee reports. And so committee. Appreciate y'all coming and all the presenters and visitors. Thank you, and we are adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.